I'll start with introductions. Darren Skiles is one of our partners at Nelson Mullins. Darren has deep knowledge and experience in healthcare legal matters involving mergers and acquisitions, transactional enterprises, regulatory issues, compliance, governance, operational matters, corporate transactions, fraud and abuse, privacy and security, medical staff issues, governmental entity laws, litigation, and outside general counsel services. One area of expertise that Darren's been focusing on is artificial intelligence and the emerging legal standards there. We also have Keith Chu. Keith is with Principal Consulting, he's a principal with Consulting with Integrity. And for more than 40 years, Keith has served as a healthcare thought leader and subject matter expert with direct experience as a consultant, hospital VP of a physician network, and over the past 28 years, Keith has developed a specialty practice focusing on hospital-based practices, especially medical imaging and radiology. Keith is a former president of the RBMA and has been a guest speaker for the RBMA, the HFMA, the ACR, and the MGMA, and Becker's Law Review. And finally, we have our own Trish Marcus. I know you did the introductions, so we'll give you one now, but Trish is our partner, and she's Nelson Mullins, and she's immediate past president of the American Health Laws Association, and we're very proud of Trish and all of her work and efforts there. Trish represents healthcare providers and health technology companies across the country on wide-ranging regulatory compliance, reimbursement, licensure, and operational matters. She has particularly deep expertise in health information, privacy, security, and technology issues. So with that, why don't we get started? And I think, Darren, why don't you give us an overview of and highlights of the legal issues that are emerging with artificial intelligence and healthcare?
Sure. Thank you, Ed. So to segue from what Jason was saying earlier, this is a really great opportunity for AI in its intersection with a very exciting area in healthcare law, which is in value-based care, because obviously in value-based care, we're coming together in cooperative ways. We are learning to integrate with each other, learning to find ways to capture the data that we need in our risk-based models. And we're doing this in new ways and really trying to think outside the box. Artificial intelligence obviously is going to offer a lot of opportunity in value-based care arrangements in capturing that data, and I think more importantly, talking about how we're going to address patient care, because we're facing, we all know, a physician's shortage, and you hear a lot of these discussions about value-based care and how much AI is going, we hear a lot of discussion about AI and how AI is going to fill in a lot of these gaps in care and coverage. Now, we're getting into dangerous territory in some ways, right? Because at what point does AI start to practice medicine? So we're going to have to answer those questions along the way. But the opportunity, the horizon is just so great. So there's a lot to think about. Before we get started, let's talk a little bit about what AI is. A simple definition: AI is meant to imitate human problem solving. It devises a prediction, it makes a decision, and it executes an action. Now you have different levels of AI. So at the lower level you have machine-based learning. Machine-based learning focuses on data and algorithms to imitate human learning, and it makes predictions based on patterns. So think about your Google Maps. How do I get from here to there? It's going to help you based on the patterns it sees. It's going to make predictions for you and tell you what time you're going to get to your destination. Beyond that, we're dealing now with deep learning. So this is much more sophisticated. And deep learning is made to simulate the human brain. And it works on what are like neural networks. So you have things like ChatGPT that generates content by learning and imitating the data that it was trained on. So as you see, if we move from machine learning to deep learning, you're in a much less predictable space. But if you think even further than that, we're looking at maybe in the decade of the 2030s of quantum computing. Now, I can't begin to tell you how this works specifically, but let me give you an idea. Classic computing deals with bits of 0 and 1, right? And they have a very discrete position. They think, these computers think in linear fashions. You can kind of see their reasoning. Quantum computing is based on quantum mechanics, and 0 and 1 can be in superposition. So you can be 0, 1, or you can be both 0 and 1, and it allows parallel reasoning and multiple possibilities. So AI is only going to get better, and it's only going to advance faster than we're ever going to be able to keep up. So let's talk a little bit about how we're thinking about this in terms of the law. Now, the next slide's meant to tell you the risk. Okay, so if you go on this side of the scale, you're talking about deterministic models based on machine learning, rules-based logic, et cetera. But as you move down the scale, you go to more probabilistic models such as ChatGPT when you're dealing with generative AI and neural networks, et cetera. And even beyond this, again, we're talking about quantum computing, et cetera. So what are we concerned about today as we think about AI? What are some of the laws that we're starting to see? Let me just say up front that this is still a highly unregulated space. We are way behind the rest of the world in terms of how we're addressing AI, both at the federal level and at the state level. But what you're going to see in 2025 and beyond is there's going to be a lot of catching up to do in the AI space. Some of the issues that you're seeing in AI, some of the concerns are privacy and security. Trish is going to talk about some of that. Discrimination and bias, things that we may not have had to think about before when we're talking about computer technology. Discrimination and bias, give you an example, a heart study. If the heart study that's being promoted uses an algorithm that was based on data, let's say of a population of men who are above the age of 50, and then that program is used in a general population for heart patients in all backgrounds, so females, younger people, et cetera, you can see that if your data is based on a group of information that does not apply to the patient that's sitting in front of you, you could have some issues. And you're starting to see that being legislated in the laws in that consideration. IP is also a concern. Is the AI program you're using, is there the risk of there being IP infringement from the algorithm that was created, or the way that the AI operates is something you're also going to have to think about. Liabilities based on errors, obviously we're going to see some malpractice actions arising, they already are. And then fraudulent misrepresentation. We all know that AI makes things up. If you've ever used ChatGPT, go and ask it a really tough question. It does not like to be wrong, and it will often give you the wrong answer. So I always like to emphasize AI is a tool. It doesn't take doctors out of the equation. It doesn't take lawyers out of the equation. It's a tool that you have to know what you're doing when you're using it. You have to know your subject matter. Very important. So some of the specific laws and regulations, the EU AI Act was one of the first global initiatives that addressed AI, and it addresses the risk of AI from a minimal risk to an unacceptable risk. And it applies to AI initiatives within the European Union as well as systems outside of it. There's also an international treaty on AI that's comprised of 46 Council of Europe states, the European Union, and 11 non-member states, including the US. And it looks at human rights, rules of law, and democratic principles in the use of AI. Biden issued an executive order about a year ago. It's meant to ensure AI is safe, secure, and responsible, set standards for safety, security, privacy, equity, civil rights, all these issues that I was talking about earlier. And it directs over 50 federal agencies to make sure that they have AI governing principles across the important AI policy areas. Again, in the areas of privacy, security, workforce, support, inclusion, equity, civil rights, et cetera. Some of the interesting, I'm sorry, I went ahead too quickly. Some of the interesting issues dealt with by federal agencies are, for example, the FTC has a final rule that bans fake reviews and testimonials when it comes to AI. The FCC is regulating AI-generated robocalls, and the SEC has begun deterring what's called AI washing. And AI washing is when you exaggerate the abilities of AI in such areas as investment services. On the state level, you see attorney generals going after AI. So, for example, in Texas, the attorney general has a recent settlement with a company called Pieces Technologies. And this was based on allegations of making false and misleading statements about the accuracy and safety of AI products. So again, this idea of saying AI does something that it actually doesn't. And then Colorado recently issued the Colorado Artificial Intelligence Act, and it looks at algorithmic discrimination, and that applies to developers and deployers of AI high-risk systems. So finally, I'll wrap up here on my segment, but when I talk to clients about their use of AI, I think about it much like I would think about a compliance program, is that you really have to have a gatekeeper, first and foremost, somebody who knows what AI is being utilized in the institution, and somebody who can be a gatekeeper to what comes in and how AI is continued to be used. Also, it's important to get all the stakeholders in the institution to have an input here, because think about this, hospitals can be incredibly segmented entities. You can have people doing something that doesn't connect with the whole, right? So you have to have everybody coming to the table, talking about what their uses of AI are, what the possibilities are, but what the risks are, and how do we address those risks. And I think of just one more thing. I was thinking about this when I was first starting out as an attorney years ago for a hospital system. I would look at contracts ad nauseum, and a lot of these were software contracts. And, I would negotiate these arrangements just by the words on the paper. They had clauses on indemnity, how you're being paid, et cetera, et cetera. Well, AI changes the dynamic in the negotiation process now, if you think about it, right? Because now, as a legal counsel, I have to be working with my client to know what that AI vendor is bringing to the table. How does their product work? I didn't have to know that as much before. And I have to know that they're using the right governance principles before they implement that AI into the hospital system. That's a very sensitive environment. So I have to be much more on my game than I had to before in terms of knowing more about the vendor coming in. So if your client says, I want to use an out-of-the-box AI product, that's a concern, not to say it's wrong, but how much are you going to be able to peek behind the veil of that AI vendor to know how they're making the bread, so to speak? So
That's interesting. I guess I'm going to show my age, but you're talking about knowing what that product does. It reminds me of 2001 Space Odyssey, where the computer takes over everything. And
Hal.
Yeah.
Hi, Hal.
Hal.
Yeah. Well, Keith, I know with your expertise in radiology, you have a case study on how to employ AI in the radiology specialty for purposes of value-based care contracting. Can you give us a review of that?
Sure. I was asked to show up and basically give you some hard detail about how you can utilize AI in a value-based enterprise type scenario. Because I specialize in radiology, and radiology is one of those areas right now that is being extremely aggressive is probably the best word, in the utilization of AI. Because AI, as Darren's outlined, it can actually cover a wide variety of types of applications. So you can have AI applications like ChatGPT that are more for dictation and transitional activities. but you've also got the clinical or the digital side of things where you're actually looking at images. And that's what gets utilized a great deal within radiology. What I'm going to do is step you through a case study of a review that was done, and I'll just tell you the punchline at the end of this is we did not apply this as a value-based enterprise activity within the system because all of this review was done retrospectively. As part of the process of a value-based enterprise, the KPIs and everything else have to be set up and the review has to be done concurrent to the utilization of whatever program you're involved with. But this review has given us the framework of how we are going to actually be utilizing AI in our value-based enterprise activities within the system, because stepping through this, you're going to see exactly what we had to do. So what this is basically, I was working with a large health system out on the West Coast. It's important to note that they actually do have a full risk insurance product within their system. They cover their employees and they are open to the community. The product actually covers, I want to say it's 450 or 475,000 lives. And so that actually is part of the conversation in all of this as we get through some of these numbers. But the system started utilizing back in 2019, well, the system made a decision that they wanted to address primary health issues with their application of AI in their system. One of the primary issues that they've noted in their region is lung cancer. From a radiology perspective, it's the #1 reason that there's malpractice cases brought in radiology, so it's a really high concern in radiology as well. And so in 2019, they actually started down the path of bringing AI to the system, and that AI actually reviews the images from a CT chest and any other CT image where chest or pulmonary tissue could actually be seen. So, CT chest, you get it. But CT of a shoulder, guess what? You actually get the upper pole of a lung. So all of these were reviewed as part of the review process by this artificial intelligence that was put in place. So, this is it's small type on the slide. You've got a full set of these so you can read all of this later. But basically the ground rules were, can any of the following occur or be documented when you are looking through establishing the ground rules for utilizing any type of program or product in a value-based enterprise? You know, here we actually wanted to try to figure out if we could compensate the radiologists for the non-RVU productive time that they invested. If you're going to be having radiologists read a study, have the AI review the study, there is an output that requires the radiologist then to go back and look at what did the AI find. Excuse me. How did that all process through? Can we get reimbursed for the utilization of AI? We're starting to see codes for very specific AI products, but we're also starting to see general AI reimbursement codes developed by CMS. The commercials aren't following behind rapidly, but ultimately they will get there, as Jason's pointed out. Once CMS does it, everybody else kind of falls in line. Can we demonstrate that there's an improved quality of patient care? That is an extremely important process from a value-based enterprise perspective. And can we decrease the future cost of patient care? So again, these are the considerations we went through as we attempted to build this review of the utilization of AI and whether or not it would fit into a value-based enterprise approach. So we actually did some analysis work. We established the KPIs. You've got slides here that I'm actually going to fly through right now that list a lot of the KPI activity we had. The other thing that is important is that in this particular situation, this was an extremely diverse group of individuals involved in the development of the KPIs because lung cancer touches patients more than just in radiology. It touches them in oncology and pharmacology and pathology and anatomic pathology, and all of those people have to be involved in the discussion because each of them has vital input into the not only the resources that will be utilized on these patients, but on the importance of the information that is gained from the utilization of the AI in not only the development of a treatment plan for these patients, but the ultimate diagnosis and ultimate therapeutics that are applied to this patient. So let's see here. I'm not going to go through this or this or this. I'm popping through a bunch of these because it's just not really. Okay. So what we did was, let's see if did I just pop through one too many? Yep, I'm sorry. What we did was we looked at the AI and its outputs for the entire period of August of 2019 through May of 2021. During that time period, we actually had the AI operational on a little more than 70,000 studies. So we have a very good statistical base upon which to build our arguments. Out of those studies, about 1,300 of those studies were flagged. Now, for those of you that know how AI works, there are positive flags and then there are no or negative flags. Positive flags can actually be true. It actually found something. They can also be false. One of the problems you have, especially if you're doing an abdomen CT where you get the lower poles of the lung, you may actually have a bowel loop because of the positioning of the lung and the diaphragm with gas or fecal matter trapped that looks like it's some kind of a lung nodule. That would be a false positive from an AI perspective. And you get those. So out of those 1,300, we actually found that only 536 were truly positive findings by the artificial intelligence applied. What that means is, in blunt terms, the radiologist missed a lung nodule. The radiologist looked at the study and didn't note it. Out of those 537, 257 of those studies were clinically significant. Again, percentage-wise, we're very low. But yet, that's 257 people that the course of their care was changed because of the application of the AI. Out of those 257 people, when this was put together, we had 5 patients that were pathology identified. So anatomic pathology done on a specimen identified that they had lung cancer. It's now up to, it's either 16 or 17 on this exact same patient population. That's not many, right? So what's the big deal? Here's the big deal. We looked at the time that was invested through all of the KPIs to get through all of this. But the big thing to think about is the impact to the patient, because all of these lung cancers, and I think this is on a slide I'm going to hit you with in just a minute, but all of these lung cancers were identified at stage 1 or stage 2. Normally, lung cancer is identified at stage 3 or stage 4. Life expectancy for an individual identified with stage 1 lung cancer at 5 years is 68%. Life expectancy of an individual with stage 3 or 4 lung cancer at 5 years is 5 or 6%. That is a massive impact for the individual and their family. But the next thing, and Jonah, you'll love to hear this, Jonah's company actually does studies and publishes them for all of us of what the average cost of care is for different types of disease processes. The cost of care of a stage 1 lung cancer is between $80,000 and $100,000. The cost of care for a stage 3 or 4 lung cancer is $400,000 to $500,000. Look at the impact on the long-term cost of care for that patient population. It is dramatic, and it is something that you can truly kind of cheer about. So, I'm not going to go through these, but what I'm going to try to show you is, because the slide numbers aren't showing up here, although, here we go. The AI product itself costs $400,000 a year. We actually were able to show that the system, through inpatient surgeries, pharmacology, oncology, chemo, everything else, generated about 1.4 additional $1 million in revenue from the utilization of this AI. And we were able to show, because of the cost difference in the treatment of these patients on an annual basis, about $900,000 in cost savings. So we actually, after adjusting for the cost of the AI, still generated about a $1.9 million annual positive to this system through additional revenue and cost savings through their insurance company. So from our perspective and my perspective, AI, when appropriately deployed, following the governance rules that Darren has outlined, you can actually utilize AI in the development of a value-based enterprise and get to many of the same things that Jason's talked about, in the fact that while the AI here was not done as a standalone, we still had physician involvement. AI in the initial phases, because AI is extremely young right now, AI can be utilized to improve the effectiveness of the physicians and do so in a manner that is extremely positive to the quality of care received by the patients, have a positive impact on the revenue stream of the health system, and through a value-based enterprise, the non-RVU time utilized or invested by these physicians can be reimbursed to them by the enterprise out of that additional revenue stream. So this is one of those things that, in my estimation, it's not just a win-win, it's a win-win, 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 because everybody comes out of this far better off. And it allows the continual evolution of AI and other types of technology to get to the point that Jason's outlining, in that we may ultimately need, well, we may not, it's not a may, we will ultimately need to have technology providing services, especially within radiology, because it will have the capability of being able to review studies. I mean, I'll sidetrack just a bit to give you an idea of this. Right now, believe it or not, the largest volume X-ray study done in every hospital and health system in the United States is a two-view chest. Every system will do 50 to 70,000 a year on the small side, and 300,000 or 400,000 a year in larger systems. 87 to 90% of those are normal. Now, a radiologist only gets paid $8.96 to review this, okay? But if you could run it through an AI program and have the AI simply outline, this one doesn't look normal, you would take that 100,000 studies and drop it down to 5,000 studies and drop 95,000 studies off of the read list of a radiologist every year. Now, for good quality care, you're going to actually do periodic reviews on a random basis of those that the AI says were normal. And that's an acceptable approach. It's basically doing peer review on the AI. But it will get there, and it will happen. And that's part of the reason that I think we're looking at the fact there is hope for addressing some of these problems. So I'm going to shut up now, and Trish is going to talk to us about well, actually, Ed's going to introduce her. Sorry, I'll shut up now.
No, you're doing a good job. But Trish, I guess when you look at something like the use of AI here, and you're obviously mining a database, looking at those studies, what do you see in terms of privacy issues and other things, from medical judgment, et cetera, that need to be considered in these type of arrangements?
Not too much. No.
Okay.
That was a very broad question. I am going to speak with you for just a few minutes about some of the regulatory agencies that protect health data and how their regulations impact the use of AI in healthcare. And we will tie it back to the value-based care scenarios. I promise that. So, HIPAA, we all have heard about HIPAA. As an aside, I think this audience might be interested to know that one of our partners who is very big into AI, Bob Caulfield, took this presentation, these slides, and put it into an AI tool that creates a podcast. And so I got to listen to what fake people who know nothing about any of this would describe for each of our 3 presentations. There were some annoying features. It was actually pretty well done. There were some annoying features of it, but my favorite feature happened to be that they pronounced HIPAA, HIPAIA. And that was just irritating. I mean, there's not an extra I after the second P, before the first A, right? So anyway, so we've all seen and heard about, and maybe even at this point experienced, you go to the doctor and they have an ambient listening device. So instead of the doctor doing this and looking up and asking you questions, the doctor theoretically, although I was not advised, this happened to me at a recent physician office visit, I was not advised that AI was on, but I saw on the screen AI, recording or whatever. I'm like, well, that's nice. Thank you for the heads up. But anyway, and so the question has arisen, what are the rules surrounding AI and using patient identifying information to train that AI? The reason it's arisen is that there are some vendors, I will not name them, who require covered entities, providers, to sign contracts for the use of this AI tool, and the contracts essentially say that the vendor is going to use a certain amount of PHI, not the whole shebang, but a certain component of it to train the AI tool. And so you have to think about, if you're a HIPAA geek, you have to think about, well, is that doable? Can we actually permissibly do that? The answer is it depends. And the reason it depends is because if the vendor is an internal vendor, meaning if you are a health system and you have your own AI group and tool, you can use your internal information for your own treatment, payment, and healthcare operations under HIPAA. And the purpose behind recording and transcribing a note is a healthcare operation. It's to help the clinician become more effective and assist in the provision of quality care. But that doesn't happen all the time. That being, often folks who are acquiring this AI are not, they haven't produced it in-house. So the AI vendor is a business associate. So under HIPAA, you then have to look at and think about, well, okay, what can a business associate do with PHI? They can do whatever is permitted or required by their business associate agreement. So if any of you have seen a BAA that says this business associate can use PHI to train its AI tool, I would suggest that you rethink including that provision.
Can
Yeah.
our IT folks re-hit the TVs? They're going to turn off in just a minute. AV folks?
Well, I can do this.
No, actually, they have to use the
Oh.
remote for the TV, not
Yeah.
advancing the computer. Sorry about that.
No worries. Well, while we're waiting for the TV to shut off, so in addition, a business associate can use or disclose PHI for any purpose that a covered entity can. Or put another way, if a covered entity can't use or disclose PHI for a particular purpose, the business associate can't. But the BA still has to comply with certain rules surrounding HIPAA. I already mentioned that generally covered entities and business associates can use PHI for treatment, payment, and healthcare operations purposes. And so business associate agreements often say the business associate can use or disclose PHI to aggregate data to assist in a healthcare operation of the covered entity. So that's one possibility. The other possibility is business associates are permitted if it states in the business associate agreement, business associates are permitted to use and disclose PHI for the business associate's proper management and administration. So the question then becomes, are either of those things paths for a business associate to use PHI to train AI? The first one we will get rid of is the proper management and administration. I and many other people have looked at all of the HIPAA preambles, and what HHS has said about this type of use for the business associates management and administration is limited. But it's fairly clear that the business associate is not supposed to use PHI to advance its own interests. So to me, that says you're not supposed to use PHI to train your AI, which you are then going to sell to a number of other systems. On the healthcare operations side, I would argue that a business associate can use PHI for a healthcare operation of the covered entity. But again, training your own AI tool is not a healthcare operations purpose for your covered entity client. And so there is I think there's a difference of opinion on what I'm saying right now, but my personal view is that you cannot use PHI to train AI if you are a vendor and you are contracting with a covered entity. And so what that means is that the covered entity then has to get patient authorization in order for in order for it to continue in this contractual arrangement with the vendor. So that's a long way of saying that the relationship between HIPAA and AI and how PHI can be shared in an AI world is complicated. I don't know that it's going to get less complicated over time. I'm going to skip in the interest of time and mention the FTC's current position. And I'm not going to really mention the election, but what I will say is I have a feeling that there will be different opinions coming out of the FTC starting next year, just based on what I've seen over the last 8 years coming out of that agency. In any event, the FTC Act essentially allows the FTC to take action against entities, including healthcare providers, but really any entity in the economy for unfair and deceptive trade practices. Basically, that means that the FTC will prohibit you from misrepresenting your purpose in collecting and using personal data. So the FTC recently has said, number one, you can't change your privacy policy or terms of service to allow the use of data for AI training because that may be unfair and deceptive. So although OCR, the HIPAA regulator, has not made a statement to the effect that I just did about whether HIPAA permits the use of PHI for training, the FTC has had no problem saying you can't do that. So you've got to get the individual's consent before you use data that identifies them to train their AI. And the chair of the FTC, Lina Khan, has gone further and has said that sensitive personal data regarding health, location, or web browsing history should be off limits for training AI models. She didn't say why, and I think the why remains to be articulated. That's probably a longer discussion than we have time for today, but there are very good reasons actually to use health data to, if we're going to have to live with AI, there are very good reasons to use health data to allow the AI to be trained. It's just that our current scheme doesn't seem to permit that except in limited ways.
Trish, if I may ask a question.
Yeah.
Why wouldn't you just prohibit the use? I mean, if you're going to, have a business associate agreement, why don't you just prohibit, expressly say you can't use this to train?
Well, you can do that in your BAA, but if your master services agreement says that the vendor can use PHI to train the AI, and if that's something that you agreed to, then, and if the master services agreement says that it is the healthcare provider's obligation to obtain all consents or authorizations necessary to allow the vendor to provide the vendor service, you're kind of stuck.
So if you're sort of in the advent of this new world, you may have contracts you've already signed that may have language in there and you're stuck. But going forward, that y'all would probably, wouldn't you be more proactive to keep those kind of provisions out of agreements to protect?
Yes, I think that's a very fair statement. A lot of vendors have been working on machine learning for several years, and they have had language in their contracts that predates the advent of actual AI, which has turned out to be very convenient for the vendors and less so for the covered entities. So it's an evolving process.
But I know what it's
Yeah.
like when the client comes to you and they bring you a contract and you're sort of stuck with what's there. Okay, what do we do with this? How do we, and then you're out there trying to interpret that business associate agreement and all these policies, but yeah.
Right.
Yep.
I will say that I have been unable to find evidence that other health systems who use this or similar products are getting patient authorizations. And so we are trying to get up with OCR to figure out whether the Office for Civil Rights, is going to take a position on this issue, and at the same time come up with something that won't cause all the physicians to quit because they don't want to have individual conversations with every patient about getting their consent to use an AI tool. So it's a tricky area, but I thought it was one that's worth noting. So we're now going to move to another agency, the Office of the National Coordinator. This agency is responsible for certifying EHR technology that our provider clients and in some cases employers use. And earlier this year, the ONC finalized what they call the HIT-1 rule. And that rule is incredibly technical. I have not been able to get through it all the way. It's a lot of numbers, so you numbers people out there will be very happy with it. It made my eyes glaze over. But essentially, the idea of this rule is to provide certification criteria for EHRs going forward to deal with some of the new AI technologies that we are seeing being implemented into EHRs. And so one of those things essentially are algorithms. Everyone here has heard of clinical decision support. Those have been, I guess, renamed by ONC as decision support interventions. And there are two kinds of those. The first is called predictive DSI, and that's essentially a technology that supports decision-making based on algorithms. And the algorithm derives relationships from training data, and then it produces an output that results in the prediction, classification, recommendation, evaluation, or analysis. So examples of these would include, for model that predicts sepsis readmission or whether a given image has a malignant tumor based on relationships that the AI tool has previously observed in these large data sets. Also, another example, models that generate draft clinical notes. We were just talking about this, that were trained on relationships observed in these same large data sets. The purpose of these rules is to provide some transparency, not only for clinicians, but also for patients and for other vendors into how these algorithms work. The second model that I mentioned very briefly, I'm just going to follow up on, that's called the evidence-based decision support intervention. And that's things like alerts or clinical calculators, which if actively presented to the member of the clinical workforce, would be used to enhance, inform, or influence their decision-making related to a patient's care. So these are two different categories of decision support interventions, but among them, they have a total of 44 source attributes. Those are things that every EHR vendor who is going to use one of these has to make available to the Office of National Coordinator, so the certifying body, but also make available to the parties who use their EHR technology, so that a doctor, for example, can understand What are the details in the output of the algorithm? What's the purpose of this intervention? What sorts of activities might be out of scope for using this particular algorithm, and things like that. So at the end of the day, the purpose here is to try to increase transparency. It's try to offer insight into whether there's bias in the algorithm. Is it able to be fairly used? Is it safe? So long story short, good stuff, just really complicated, and it still remains to be seen how well it's going to work.
Trish, can I ask a question?
Yep.
I think we're getting down to about 5 minutes.
Yep.
And I really do want you all to offer the audience your insights on this.
Of
But
course.
medical judgment, the practice of medicine, and we were talking earlier, and I know, Jason, we had a conversation with you that in maybe, a couple of decades, there won't be any, practitioners in certain areas. It'll all be machine done. But what's sort of the state of the landscape today with, the intersection of the practice of medicine and state medical boards, and at what point is this machine doing something that humans ought to have the final decision? And the other side of that is, I always think about malpractice claims. I think about maybe we might have machine malpractice coming, with these sort of things. But do y'all have any insights on that? And
I'll start, but I'm sure Keith and Darren also have insights. The Federation of State Medical Boards and I think the AMA have both made it very clear that AI is a tool, that the tool is to be used by somebody with the education and training that allows them to make an appropriate medical judgment. And so you cannot use technology absent a clinician in their view. But I do see that my sense is that as the tools get better, and I have all sorts of fun examples of their not being great, we are going to have to answer some more difficult questions. One thing I'll mention, and then I'll pass the mic, all the EHR contracts I review say, you recognize that this technology is simply a tool. It is not designed to supplement or influence your decision-making. Language such as that. It's very clear that we are moving into a realm where that sort of language is no longer going to be true. But will it continue to be included in the contracts? Or how is that issue going to be addressed? And folks in the room may know the answer. I don't.
it seems like, from the conversation we had last night with Jason about, at some point the technology, like give radiology examples, gets so sophisticated it may be better than humans in a lot of cases, interpreting and reading images. But I guess at some point it may evolve to where there's got to be another standard of review, rather than the human doing every single. I don't know. I'm just throwing it out there if you ought to think about it.
And I don't know how much everybody knows about how AI actually works, and believe me, I am not a software engineer. I'm not a network engineer. I am not a programmer. I'm lucky in that I have a client that is an AI startup. So over the last 6 years, I have learned a great deal. But within AI, it's an algorithm that's running. You establish a value. There's a whole bunch of other terminology in here, but let's just keep it simple. You establish a value. Everything above this value becomes a flag. Okay? Positive flags and negative flags both, but you establish this value. The higher you make the value, the fewer flags you get, but also the fewer false negatives that you get. And so you adjust that level. When an AI vendor comes in and you start running your AI, they should actually run for 2-3 months on your data. Because the other thing most people don't realize is the equipment you're utilizing, the noise in your network, all of that stuff has an impact on this thing. And so it will run, and you jointly with your AI vendor should establish that value. Where I think we're headed is that ultimately what will happen is you will establish some value in AI, and this number is going to actually be higher than we're seeing AI set now. And everything above that number, it's fine. Then you're gonna have another range from that number down to some other point where the AI is gonna tell you, you really ought to look at this, and you're gonna have a person look at it. And everything below that number, you don't care about. Because your incident of a positive false flag or a positive negative flag is gonna be like 0.00001%. So I think ultimately what we're looking at is the fact that the utilization of AI, you're going to see that the AI is going to differentiate the outputs. And it's gonna come in 3 sections. One where you can trust the AI because its accuracy at that level is like 99.997%. And we as a country and as a race will accept that 0.003% error rate.
Except if you're the person who,
Well,
you know,
but
or
that's
their
where,
family.
that's where that's where the malpractice piece and everything else comes in. Because right now, people in and of themselves, it's just like the study I showed you. The radiologist missed only about 1%. And if you read the literature right now, physicians are only accurate, depending upon the specialty and what they're looking at, they miss between 3 to 7% of the diagnoses or anything else as just human beings right now. So the utilization of AI is already taking this to a much higher level. So you're gonna find that point where, yeah, it's okay, this is where the people have to look, and this is where the people don't have to look. And I think that separation, just like I told you about the chest x-ray example, I think that separation is what's going to save a lot of medical specialties, because if all of your determinants are above this point, then yeah, you really do have diabetes, there's no ifs, ands, or buts. Now I've got to get you on, either some type of an insulin regime and diabetic education for meal planning, care, foot care, all of the other stuff. In this region, though, I'm not sure you're diabetic. And I need to actually, as a physician, look at all of this in a little more detail. And if you're below this number, you're not diabetic. It was just a fluke on your fasting blood sugar that morning. Sorry, it happens. We're human. So there are things that will happen as we move forward, where I think we're looking at the fact is that legislatively allowing that to happen is also going to take time, because right now, only a physician can offer a diagnosis in not only the United States, but virtually every state within the United States in the way that the laws are written. So we're going to have to go through legislative changes as this technology continues to evolve before we're actually going to get to that point.
And part of that would be educating the legislatures and states,
Oh, yeah.
and whether you have any sort of.
And I'll just add one thing. So talking to the powers that be in hospital systems, this is kind of flipped for me a little bit, because I often thought to myself, well, there are a lot of people who are worried that AI is going to replace their jobs. And recently I had a chief medical information officer said, maybe you're looking at this the wrong way. Maybe AI is going to allow folks who have a lower level skill to do higher level jobs. I know that makes us shudder as attorneys, right? But at the same time, with the way healthcare is going, right, where you have a shortage of physicians, healthcare is getting more expensive, how do you find ways to bridge those gaps?
Right.
And is that going to be the next great horizon that we're looking at, where AI does take over in some sense those treatment decisions, and we have medical boards who are going to have to reconsider this, perhaps.
Right.
It does seem scary, but that's probably ultimately where we're heading.
Sounds like, it's a new frontier, and maybe we'll get more done by machines rather than less, and then the humans can deal with those aberrations and the flags. But I think we're out of town on this time on this panel, but wanted to thank our panelists, and would hope everybody give them a round of applause.